The lobbyist and the big money and the Washington establishment is not going to pick the next president of the United States. That choice is going to be made by we the people. Well then, after an incredible victory in Iowa, the week that followed that, the press all said, well, it's over now. Can't go anywhere from here, because everyone knows a conservative cannot do well in New Hampshire. It just cannot happen. I heard that over and over and over again. It cannot happen, and the people of New Hampshire stood up and gave us a strong third-place finish to the astonishment of the media and the pundits. It has been an amazing, dizzying couple of weeks, seeing the passion, the energy. Both of those victories came from the grassroots. Both of those victories came from the volunteers we have all over the country. And now, as the race always does, Iowa and New Hampshire helped narrow the field. And then South Carolina is in the business of picking presidents. I am so thrilled to be back in the Palmetto State. I gotta say, Texans and South Carolinians, we got an awful lot in common. We're southern states filled with military veterans, gun owners. We love God. And we are fed up with the damage and destruction Washington, D.C. is doing to this country. Now, let me ask you, anyone else here ever been burned by a politician? Look, we keep seeing this over and over and over again where we have candidates, they come out, they give a great song and dance, they talk real nice. And then when they go to Washington, they don't do what they said they would do. And we see that over and over and over again. Well, you know what? The stakes are too high. We cannot get burned again. Our country hangs in the balance. So how do we make the determination? How do we avoid falling for the same pitfalls, the same hucksters and charlatans? I'm going to suggest a very simple test. It's a test that comes from the scriptures. You shall know them by their fruits. I would suggest to everyone here, don't listen to what any of the candidates say. Don't listen to me. Don't listen to Donald Trump. Really, don't listen to Donald Trump. Or if you do, you may have to send your kids out of the room. Don't listen to any of the campaign rhetoric. Instead, say to every one of us, show me. You know, I had a former boss who used to say, if I'm ever accused of being a Christian, I'd like for there to be enough evidence to convict me. The same is true of being a conservative. I'm going to suggest to you 7 pivotal battles, 7 what Reagan would call times for choosing, that we as voters should look and hold every candidate up to assess what are their fruits, what's their record, what's their walk. The first is life. The right to life is foundational to everything else, and every human life is a precious gift from God. Now listen, in a Republican primary, every candidate is going to tell us they're pro-life. That's what you say in a Republican primary. I'm going to suggest the question we should ask of each of the candidates is, show me where you've stood up and fought to defend the right to life. Before I was in the Senate, I was the Solicitor General of Texas, the chief lawyer for the state in front of the U.S. Supreme Court. In 5.5 years in that post, over and over again, we stood for conservative principles and won. We defended the federal ban on partial birth abortion, went to the U.S. Supreme Court, and won 5-4. We defended the state of New Hampshire's parental notification laws, went to the U.S. Supreme Court, and won unanimously. And when the Texas legislature banned taxpayer funding from going to Planned Parenthood, a federal district court struck down that law. I personally argued the case in the Court of Appeals. We won unanimously and defunded Planned Parenthood. Now, I'll tell you, when it comes to the right to life, if a candidate has never stood before and defended the right to life, if a candidate has spent 60 years of his life describing himself as very, very pro-choice, if a candidate has defended partial birth abortion for most of his adult life, we should not be surprised if as president, he will not defend the right to life. If I'm elected president, on the first day in office, I will instruct the U.S. Department of Justice to open an investigation into Planned Parenthood and to prosecute any and all criminal violations. The second pivotal battle is the battle over marriage and religious liberty. In June of last year, the Supreme Court, 5 justices, arrogantly purported to strike down the marriage laws of all 50 states. Now, when that decision came down, that was yet another time for choosing, yet another line drawn in the sand. And every leader could decide on which side of the line do you stand. I'll tell you, my 2 leading competitors in the Republican primary both said publicly that that decision was the settled law of the land. We had to accept it, surrender, and move on. I got to tell you, those are word for word Barack Obama's talking points. What does it say when leading Republican presidential candidates are reading Obama's talking points on gay marriage? I'll tell you this, I made a very different decision to stand on the other side of the line and say that decision was wrong, it was illegitimate, it was unconstitutional, and it will not stand. And intertwined with the battle over marriage is the battle over religious liberty. We have seen an assault on religious liberty that is unprecedented. I can tell you, for me, defending religious liberty has been a passion for the last 2 decades. As Solicitor General, we defended the 10 Commandments monument, stands on the state capitol grounds. We went to the U.S. Supreme Court, and we won 5-4. We defended the Pledge of Allegiance, the words, "one nation under God." We went to the Supreme Court and we won unanimously. And in private practice, I was incredibly privileged to represent over 3 million veterans pro bono for free, defending the Mojave Desert Veterans Memorial, a lone white Latin cross erected over 70 years ago to honor the men and women that gave their lives in World War I. The ACLU filed a lawsuit saying you could not display a cross on public grounds. They won in the district court. They won in the Court of Appeals. The Court of Appeals ordered a giant sack to be placed over the Veterans Memorial with a chain and a padlock on the bottom. I will say this, the court was right about one thing. There is power in the image of the cross. And I had the honor of representing 3 million veterans before the U.S. Supreme Court defending the Mojave Desert Veterans Memorial, and we won 5-4. If I'm elected president on the first day in office, I will instruct the Department of Justice and the IRS and every other federal agency that the persecution of religious liberty ends today. And when you think about the next president, there will be few decisions more consequential that he or she will make than appointing 1, 2, 3, or even 4 Supreme Court justices. We are one justice away from a radical left-wing majority, the likes of which this country has not seen. It would profoundly damage our constitutional liberties for a generation. And every one of us should ask of every candidate who has a proven record fighting to defend the Constitution and Bill of Rights, who do I know will put strong, principled constitutionalists on the Supreme Court of the United States? A third battle, a third time for choosing, was the battle over guns. Now, I'm told folks in South Carolina kind of like their guns. One of the things I love about this great state is y'all define gun control the same way we do in Texas, hitting what you aim at. We all remember back, spring of 2013. Tragic shooting in Sandy Hook, Connecticut. President Obama, as is his pattern over and over again, chose to use that as an excuse not to do what he should have done, bring us together, go after violent criminals, come down on them like a ton of bricks. But instead he uses an excuse to try to undermine the constitutional right to keep and bear arms of law-abiding citizens. All right, Mr. T just said, "I pity the fool." That's pretty good. That was another time for choosing. And the question to ask, listen, in a Republican primary, everyone says, "I support the Second Amendment." Unless you are clinically insane. That's what you say in a Republican primary. The question to ask is real simple. Where were you in the spring of 2013 when Barack Obama and Harry Reid and Chuck Schumer came after the Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms? And I'll tell you, I was so proud to stand with millions of Americans and lead the fight against that. And every one of Obama's proposals to undermine the Second Amendment was voted down on the Senate floor. A fourth battle, a fourth time for choosing. A fourth battle, a fourth time for choosing, was the battle over ObamaCare. ObamaCare is the single biggest job killer in America. Millions of Americans have lost their jobs, have been forced into part-time work, have lost their health insurance, have lost their doctors, have seen their health insurance premiums skyrocket. Now, in the fall of 2013, millions of Americans rose up and said, stop this train wreck, stop this disaster that is Obamacare. I was proud to stand and lead that fight, standing for 21 hours on the Senate floor to say, stop this disaster. So if a candidate today tells you, I'm opposed to Obamacare, there's a real simple question to ask. Where were you when the fight was being fought? And by the way, if a candidate is campaigning, promising Bernie Sanders-style socialized medicine, the federal government taking over our health care, then we shouldn't be surprised if we cannot trust that candidate to do anything good about Obamacare. If I am elected president, we will repeal every word of Obamacare. A fifth time for choosing was the battle over amnesty. Now, in this presidential race, a whole lot of people are talking about immigration.